NEMESIS DREADKNIGHTS. The fighting had been swift but hard. Corinthus was near scoured of the Neverborn, but nearly was not enough. It turned out not near enough. Cults had prayed for months on end. Their forebears had sacrificed for near a century. All to one aim, to one goal. The drawing of their heaven into the real world. But their idea of heaven on earth was far from the usual vision. For the population of the small world of Corinthus had been turned to the worship of the dark powers. It had been a quiet little world, rarely visited by others, never missing their tithes. Not even close to a major jump nexus, fully within the deepest boundaries of the Imperium of Man. Corinthus. A backwater with little to offer and nothing to comment about. The one administratum official who had visited in the last millennium had made one simple footnote to cover the entire system. Mostly harmless. It had only been mostly, instead of entirely, as the official had caught a mild case of sunburn one afternoon when he did not avail himself of the local habit of wearing a wide-brimmed hat at high noon. Unobtrusive, uninteresting, and thus ignored. But when the Cicatrix maledictum tore across reality, this all came crashing down. The harmless idyll was now on the very front lines in the war against the hordes of chaos that were constantly blurted out of the rent across the galaxy. More than this, it was directly in the path of over a score of raiding chaos warbands over the next 20 years. None felt they could pass by the opportunity for a little easy grazing, and thus the people of Corinthus had been culled again and again, forced to run through their streets in terror, hide in their orchards in the hopes that the invaders would simply lose interest at such poor sport. And they were right. For eventually, all of the consecutive warbands had indeed moved on. But each time those who clambered out of hidey holes and sewers were fewer. Each time they crept out, they were more terrified, more unhinged, and more brutal themselves. Simply by exposure alone, they had begun to devolve into a tribal society, where all that was now of worth was either the ability to hide, to scavenge, or to survive, or the only other prized trait, the ability to control others, through physical intimidation or manipulation and charisma. And the transformation of the people of Corinthus was from a kind and hard-working communal society into a blood-soaked and barbaric horror, and it took only 2 decades. The people of Corinthus had learnt from their invaders. They had learnt that they were far too unimportant for the Imperium to lift a finger to save them. They learnt that nobody could be trusted when push came to shove, and it was every man for himself. And they had learnt that the power of the dark gods could not be stayed or resisted by them. So they took the next logical step, the only one that made any sense. They witnessed the power of chaos suffusing their enemies. They almost universally decided, if you cannot beat them, join them. And thus did they fall to the direct worship of chaos. Factions would fight for one god or another across the plains, inside the now derelict and decaying cities, all across the world. Now, when raiding forces visited Corinthus after being ejected from the warp, instead of burning and slaughtering, they were recruiting. And this had been going on for over half a dozen decades now, and with each year, the sorcerers and priests of the dark gods would learn more and more, until finally they came together, as one lord arose and crushed all in his path. And his ambitions were plain. They were magnificent. For he would reach apotheosis through sacrifice, of course. He would become a living vessel of the Chaos God's power. He would become a demon prince. But when he had managed this, he would then bring heaven to Corinthus. He would use the collective power of the entire population to tear a hole in the very fabric of time and space, and bring the warp into real space, and surround Corinthus in its bounty and beauty. And all was proceeding as he had planned, until the prognosticators of the Grey Knights saw his intent. And as, unlike so many other thousands of corrupted slaves to darkness, this one might just pull it off. And hence they arrived, and the war was over before it even began. The feral tribes witnessed their leaders exterminated, their camps intruded by balls of light that would then explode into beings, as the Terminators of the Grey Knights appeared across the globe. Storm ravens and other craft crisscrossed the skies, as they carried purgation teams to all areas that were putting up any resistance at all. Fire fell from the heavens like rain, as the battle barge of the Grey Knights forged a path around the world, unleashing its weapons on near every inch of the planet. If anything moved, crept or crawled, the fire would come. At the last, the Grey Knights assaulted the strongest bastille of chaos power, tearing through the defenders with ease. The Space Marines, who had the power of the Emperor running through their very veins, were unstoppable. The defenders tried ranged weapons, melee attacks, explosives, and then went on to throwing baleful bolts and blasts at them. All bounced clean off. The physical attacks were as nothing to their power armor. The malefic assaults were as nothing to the power of their Aegis, their mystic defenses. And so the knights fought their way to the center of the complex and executed the human who would have doomed not only this world and all of its population, but planets and entire systems for light years around. Only 2 of the knights proceeded inside the inner sanctum. It was enough. The others fanning out and hunting the trails of Neverborn or Possessed that still lingered in hiding. As the champion of the Brotherhood took 2 steps forward and clashed with, the difference in power and experience was immediately obvious. The Chaos Champion was a petty thing, and so, after only 10 strikes of Holy Blade on the spoiled hammer, the Grey Knight's champion whipped her head clean off. He then stood in pose, watching the head bounce thrice before rolling to a stop. But this had turned out to be the catalyst, the last key. When the blood of the now motionless head spilt upon the ground, a rent was formed. It was spacious and powerful, and neither the Brotherhood champion nor the other Marine who stood in Terminator armor could close it now. The Grey Knight's champion took steps backwards until he was next to the Terminator armored colleague. Not once did he take his eyes from the widening aperture of fire that burst into existence. The 2 men witnessed the first massive hoof come through the tear and land heavily enough to shake the building to its very foundations. They both looked at one another for a second. The champion then just flatly stated, "I will hold its attention. Come back swiftly." The Terminator armored man nodded and then disappeared in a flash of light, just as the head of the being came through. It seemed to have had to crouch down, even to make it through this huge doorway, and as it exited, it then stood tall, its wings unfurling, and both of its arms outstretched. In both its hands it held gigantic twisted weapons of metal and flame. It stood over 20 feet tall, its form a huge blood-red beast of bovine lower half and human upper. But its head was that of a monster, a cross between feline hunter, ancient bear, and boar. Its tusks, curled up so much as to be close to its eye level, Its shaggy mane covered its shoulders. The heat that emanated from it made the very stone begin to char and blacken. All that was flammable caught light and added to the heat distortion that now filled the area. It did not bellow. It did not scream. The beast seemed almost languid as it concluded its stretch, and then looked down at the solitary grey knight who stood before it, sword raised.
"Your master flees, and leaves you here to die?"
The grey knight took 3 paces forward and returned to its defensive stance, offering the challenge alone.
"Yes, I accept your challenge, son of the anathema. Let us be about it,"
stated the demon, as it raised its axe and sword and then launched them down at the single warrior. For his part, the knight moved like lightning. The 2 demonic blades came down, and he rolled to the side with ease, but then, knowing this simple assault was not all the demon was capable of, he jettisoned himself across the room, rolling forward when he landed. Ducking, he rebounded off the wall and back again. This was all made necessary, as despite how large the demon was, it moved as fast as an Eldar dancer. The bloodthirster tore huge rents out of the floor whenever his blade did not connect with the knight, brought down 2 walls in quick succession, the tiled roof falling down about the 2 as they fought. The knight would skip into striking distance, be blocked even though he was so small. The demon did not wish to be struck by this particular holy blade, even if it would normally have sustained a single hit to give it the advantage to kill its assailant. Then the knight would roll and leap to avoid the counterstrikes of the cornate horror. At the last, after what seemed like an eternity of evasion, and attempting to get even a nick on the being, the knight was tiring. The demon sensed this, and stood back for a moment. It looked down at the grey knight and said mockingly,
"Take your breath. I will wait. I will slay you with my strength, skill, and power, not out of your lack of endurance."
At this, the knight now stepped back and sheathed his blade, a clear sign that it was over. The knight had retracted himself from the duel, or so he thought. The bloodthirster snorted out of its nostrils and looked at him quizzically for a moment. Then the knight pointed, and the beast followed the direction of his finger. At that, a burst of light filled the space. When it declined in brilliance, what had appeared now became clear, and there he was. The other knight, the one who had teleported away, had now returned. For he was the Grand Master of his brotherhood, and around him was now a Dreadknight armor. Standing twice the height of a marine, bearing a huge blade of his own, the Grand Master now dipped his blade at the Brotherhood champion, and then stepped into the on-guard position as it looked up at the bloodthirster. The demon guffawed loudly and then charged at the Grand Master. The 2 met, and the demon was visibly shaken when its 2 blades came down with all of its force. Yet instead of attempting to evade or parry the blades with an angled guard to diffuse the strength of the blows, the Dread Knight just stepped in and the Grand Master raised his blade in a direct block. When the knight did not yield, and the blades did not crash through his torso, the demon again snorted, but this time in rage. The Grand Master then pushed the blades to the side, and the bloodthirster began its assault again. But before it could bring its weapons down quickly, the Grand Master assailed him with the screaming, whirring weapon on its frame. The heavy psi cannon infused each of its bolts with empiric power, which tore into the demon. Flesh and blood exploded from the monster before it dodged out of the arc of the fire. But as it did so, stepping back and shielding its eyes and face from the bolts, the Grand Master took one huge thunderous step forward. He took a double-handed grip on his blade and brought it around hard, cutting through the hoofed leg of the beast. The red liquid that came from the rent looked like blood, but burnt and melted like it was lava, gouts of it barely missing the knight. The demon fell backwards and swept with its blade, but the Grand Master extended his aegis and blocked again with his own massive force sword. The blow deflected. The Nemesis Dreadknight then raised up its own blade as he launched himself into the air. It came down on the demon, and the Grey Knight's blade was forced through the demon's very heart. Blue lightning crashed from the wound, worms of it flicking across the torso, but also light now ran through the veins of the demon. It was being consumed from the inside, as our heart pumped the light around its entire being. Those light-filled veins then ruptured, as sanctic energies forced new exit points, bursting skin in huge tears. The light then coalesced in the demon's head, and its tusks exploded, as the rest of its skull then crumbled, and its skin and sinew seemed to evaporate from it, the light now bursting from its eyes and shining into the heavens. Wind whipped around them, filling the air with dust and sparks of light. Then there was a huge sucking noise, and the Brotherhood champion was knocked to his knees by the implosion and the subsequent rush of wind coming to fill the gap. The bloodthirster of Khorne was gone, banished back to the realm of the Blood God. Welcome, gentle listener. I am Voldemort, your faithful servant, and I wish to introduce you to the important factions, forces, and units of the Warhammer 40k universe, the grim darkness of the far future, where there is no time for peace, there is only time for war. If you are a regular gentle listener, then I would ask that you check that you are still subscribed and have notifications on. If not, then do consider subscribing, as then you will not miss out on ongoing narratives, if that sort of thing appeals to you. And now, a brief word from our sponsors. Well, at least this time it's actually Warhammer connected. 2 minutes 5 seconds, exactly. Go. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. It is the 41st millennium. The Imperium of mankind is beset on all sides by enemies, and we have never been closer to extinction. But there is yet a single slender hope in the form of humanity's ultimate warriors, the genetically enhanced super soldiers, the Space Marines. In the game, Warhammer 40,000 Lost Crusade, you must take command of these forces and lead them to victory. It will not be easy, nothing worth doing if it is. You will have to repair your battle barge, raise troops, train them, recruit heroes to lead them, then sally out into the stars and reclaim them in the name of the Imperium of mankind. You will face stiff resistance from aliens and traitors, and not all who wear the Imperial Aquila are your allies, as there is a strong PvP element to this quest. Warhammer 40,000 Lost Crusade, the free-to-play mobile MMO strategy game. If you join the Crusade today, you will gain access to one of the greatest defenders of humanity, Gabriel Seth, the chapter master of the infamous Flesh-Tearers Space Marines, who wields the mighty chainsword Bloodreaver, a true hero of the Imperium. So hit the links in the video description, download the game, then raise your banners. Do you have the courage to take command of a battle barge filled with the Imperium's finest fighting men? Do you have the skill to repair their flagship, their armies, and their fortunes? Do you have the will and strength of character to embark on the Lost Crusade? For to play Warhammer 40,000 Lost Crusade, like its heroes, the Space Marines, you must know no fear. And today, we are to introduce a rare piece of war gear indeed. The Nemesis Dreadknight of the 666th chapter of the Adeptus Astartes, the Demon Hunters of the Grey Knights. And so, as usual, for the very basics, let us lean on existing wisdom. To quote, Nemesis Dreadknights. It is a truth reluctantly acknowledged by the Grey Knights that valor, purity of spirit, and battle skill can only carry a warrior so far in single combat with a greater demon of chaos. After all, such diabolic monstrosities tower over even Terminators, and even the weakest wield the raw might of more than a dozen Space Marines. It is often necessary that such hellspawn be faced down and destroyed, not by an entire brotherhood of Grey Knights, nor a score of Terminators, nor even a squad of Purifiers, but by a single valiant hero of the chapter. For such desperate times was a Nemesis Dreadknight forged. A Nemesis Dreadknight is a marvel of technology. At its indomitable heart is an adamantium alloy skeleton whose great limbs are given life by a compact but powerful plasma reactor. Over this are layered a series of bonded ceramite plates and armored control linkages. Once a Grey Knight is strapped into the command harness on the Dreadknight's front, synaptic implants give him complete control of the machine's limbs and weapon systems, essentially granting him a surrogate body far mightier and more durable than his own. When matched with the Nemesis Dreadknight's devastating weapon systems, and the all but impenetrable force field that protects the otherwise exposed pilot, this combination serves to elevate the Grey Knight's combat abilities to a point where he can withstand the blows of even the mightiest greater demon, and unleash a fearsome counterattack in reply. It is unclear whether the technology that drives the Nemesis Dreadknight is a fragment of mankind's lost knowledge, preserved through the dark age of technology and the terrible times since, or if its origins owe more to alien influence. Either way, the Grey Knights hold their peace, and seem determined never to share their secrets. Few organizations in the Imperium could afford such an attitude, for it would bring them foursquare into conflict with the edicts of the Adeptus Mechanicus, and indeed the principles under which all of mankind's military is supplied. However, the Grey Knights answer only to the Inquisition, and so stand apart from such politics. It would doubtless suit the Grey Knights to have every battle brother take to the field aboard a Nemesis Dreadknight. Alas, not all Grey Knights have the strength of mind and subtlety of reaction required to master the exoskeleton's many combat stances. Only a few battle brothers show enough aptitude to begin the training, let alone be deemed fit to control such a weapon in the heat of battle. If the pilot is unable to devote enough of their psychic energy to maneuvering the war machine, it will remain stoically inert. For to rouse the powerful machine spirit that inhabits a Dread Knight requires an enormous feat of willpower. Even then, a battle brother must also reserve a portion of their mind in order to maintain their aegis, for they will be of little good in combat if they leave themselves susceptible to the enemy. On the other hand, if the pilot directs even slightly too much psychic force to the articular servos, the colossal limbs of the Dread Knight may wrench violently and suddenly, tearing the Grey Knight's own limbs free from his torso. This is to say nothing of the control required to wield a Nemesis great weapon, to deliver earth-shattering blows to the monsters of chaos and slice through the plated hides of towering greater demons. So it is that Nemesis Dreadknight pilots are among the Grey Knight's most honored warriors. For through long years of training and meditation, they had mastered skills that are the envy of their brethren. Whilst other warriors would perhaps shirk such a brutal and exacting path, the battle brothers of the Grey Knights embrace it, knowing that each trial furnishes them with new knowledge and skills. End quote. Ah, the Dread Knight. When it came out, I do remember many people thinking them quite risible. A similar kind of response as to the Centurion, I suppose. But I believe this was due to the innovation in the model. The sharp change in aesthetic from many of the newest sculpts that would be considered more safe, but I am happy to see that they have become such a consistent and accepted part of the usual visual lexicon of the grim darkness of the far future that they are now being aped. For the new battle suits of the Adeptus Astartes, the Sisters of Battle, which many have coined as Nundam, are of the same ilk. And were it not for the courage of the designer and sculptors of this model, the Nundam would certainly not have come into existence at all. And I feel that that would be a shame. For all things considered, they're pretty darn cool. So love them or hate them for any reason, be it lore, design, intent or size, do please give a brief nod to this amazing figure, for in my mind, it truly was a bit of a trailblazer. I have been Voldemort, your faithful servant. I hope you have enjoyed this brief introduction to Nemesis Dreadknights. If so, then please do consider liking and subscribing. Now, no matter what you do today, do try to make some time for fun. Toodaloo.